NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. Israel has deported 4 Italian activists. It is the first lot of the hundreds detained from an aid flotilla bound for Gaza after its interception by Israeli forces, bringing an end to the mission. Protests have erupted worldwide in support of the Gaza aid flotilla. Protesters gathered in Turkey, Greece, Italy, Tunisia and Argentina after the interception of the fleet of 40 vessels. Tragic development has now been confirmed by the Greater Manchester Police. One of the victims of the deadly Manchester synagogue terror attack has been found to have lost their life from a police gunshot. The death toll from the collapse of the multi-story Islamic boarding school in Indonesia has tragically climbed to 13, signaling an end of the 72-hour golden period to find survivors. Now rescue teams are recovering bodies from the rubble. India has sharply condemned the violent crackdown by Pakistani forces on widespread protests in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. The Ministry of External Affairs has stated that Pakistan must be held accountable. The US government shutdown has immediately curtailed the release of vital economic data. The shutdown has entered its 3rd day, and amongst the most significant delays is the Labour Department's monthly jobs report, a key indicator of economic health that was scheduled for release today. Sean Diddy Combs will be sentenced today in New York. He was found guilty on 2 counts of transportation for prostitution. The prosecution wants him to serve at least 11 years in prison, while Combs' lawyers ask for 14 months. Dame Sarah Mullally has been named the 106th Archbishop of Canterbury, making her the first woman to hold the most senior spiritual position in the Church of England and leader of the Global Anglican Communion. Her appointment has been formally approved by King Charles III and follows a year-long vacancy and is being touted as a historic moment. All right, viewers, those are the headlines. And on to some breaking news we're tracking at the top of this hour. US President Donald Trump has now laid out the final terms of a US-backed Gaza peace proposal, putting the onus entirely on Hamas to accept. He has stated that an agreement must be reached with Hamas by Sunday evening at 6 p.m. Washington, D.C. local time. The U.S. president has further stated that the Gaza peace deal offers a path for de-escalation and has said that the deal spares the lives of all remaining Hamas members. However, it will be their last chance. He's also urged all Palestinians, calling them innocent, and also has asked them to immediately leave the area, warning of potential threat. There's a very long message that Donald Trump has in fact put out on Truth Social. He has called Hamas a ruthless and violent threat for many years in the Middle East. He has in fact pointed to the October 7th massacre in Israel, highlighting that babies, women, children, old people, they all were ready to celebrate. However, their lives were cut short. He's also in fact called for innocent Palestinians to immediately leave the area, in fact, if Hamas does not accept the peace plan. He has also stated that the deal spares the lives of all remaining Hamas fighters, calling them to accept the plan. He has stated that the details of the documents are known to the world, and he has also stated that the US will have peace in the Middle East one way or the other. The violence and bloodshed will stop. He stated that the releasing the hostages is important, including the bodies of those who are dead, and those hostages must be sent back to Israel now. And he stated pointedly that an agreement must be reached by 6 p.m. local time in Washington, D.C. and this is the last chance that the U.S. is giving Hamas. And he said that if this is not done so, all hell like no other will in fact break out against Hamas. He is once again signed his long message stating that there will be peace in Middle East one way or the other. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Jordan Cope. He's an expert on Middle East affairs, joining us from Dallas in Texas. Thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. With, of course, the announcement being made, we do know that the ball has been in Hamas's court since early last week itself. But now Trump coming out, making it very, very clear and setting a deadline for Hamas. We do know that Qatar and Egypt as well, they've been mounting pressure on Hamas leaders to accept this particular deal. Do you think they will go ahead and do so? Or as Trump has said, they won't and hell will break loose?
It's interesting when analyzing how the negotiation process has begun. And first, it should be noted that negotiating with terrorists is obviously a very difficult task, that in this round of negotiations, Hamas was actually excluded from the process, and those at the forefront were Egypt and Qatar. Now, Qatar in the past has been accused of sabotaging conditions when it comes to peace deals, and it's also been accused of having tried to act in the best interest of Hamas, a terrorist organization it has given $1.8 billion to since 2012, when it also welcomed its senior leadership into its own sovereign territory to redeem a safe haven. So it's going to be a bit complicated to understand exactly how sincere Qatar is as a mediator and a broker, and to assess its intention to actually see the implementation of the conditions that have been proposed. Donald Trump has been very clear, for the most part, that the conditions in general are non-negotiable. However, Qatar has now essentially clarified that its understanding was slightly different from Trump's, and that certain conditions apparently within the 20 points are up for negotiation, or at least should be. Donald Trump seems to have been very firm on this. And so even though we might be optimistic that many countries around the world have signed on and have given their approval for the 20-point plan, the ultimate question remains with Hamas and whether they, as a terrorist organization, which has broken ceasefire agreements time and time again, and whose leadership has made clear that it will commit future October 7th style attacks, it's probably unlikely that Hamas will be faithful to any agreement that it ultimately agrees to. All of this being said, there are militias now rising up in the Gaza Strip, posing Hamas some trouble.
Indeed, and this is a final ultimatum that Donald Trump has presented to Hamas. He's very clear. Earlier, during the joint press briefing, he had stated that he will offer full backing to Netanyahu if Hamas does not accept the deal. And now he's come out and stated twice in his very lengthy message that hell will break loose if Hamas does not accept the conditions. We do know that this plan is very comprehensive. It provides for a technocratic Palestinian leadership to take over once Hamas is disarmed, as well as the creation of a body of peace that Trump and Tony Blair will be heading. How optimistic are you about these, elements of the plan that have been put forth?
I would have to be very skeptical just to begin with, because even with a future technocratic Palestinian government, the question comes into play as to what role the Palestinian Authority will have. And the Palestinian Authority by no means is an angelic organization in and of itself. In recent years, it has devoted over $300 million on an annual basis to subsidize what is called the Pay for Slay Fund, which awards Palestinian terrorists and their families with stipends proportionate to the crimes that they commit and the jail sentences that they serve. So the Palestinian Authority has played a front and row center in sponsoring terrorism in years past. And amongst their leadership is incredible corruption. Yasser Arafat, who headed the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the PA, amassed effectively billions of dollars of undeclared funds under his leadership, perpetuating conflict, defying the Oslo Accords, sponsoring Intifada, sponsoring the murder and death of innocent civilians, and future conflict, because what he knew was that by perpetuating conflict, he would receive future foreign aid. Mahmoud Abbas, the current head of the PA, has a net worth of over $100 million, and his thesis subject was in Holocaust denial. And so you have to question, supposedly, why the West is investing so much in the moderates. The Palestinian Authority certainly needs to reform. It might not be as bad as Hamas in terms of the degree and scale of its terrorist attacks that it sponsors, but nonetheless, it's an organization that has very evil inclinations and has proven it throughout the track record of history.
Indeed, that's not all that has taken place. In fact, the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Ishaq Dar, has recently come out and made a very shocking claim. Even as the Gulf Arab nations welcomed this plan, Pakistan also initially welcomed the plan. Ishaq Dar has now stated that the proposal that the draft proposal that the Muslim nations received was different than the final document that was put out jointly by Trump and Netanyahu. He has in fact stated, and I'm quoting what he said, that consent was not taken for the final document. How do you think this will go down with the Americans, considering the recent, improvement in ties between US and Pakistan?
First, I just have to think, why is Pakistan so concerned about its involvement in this conflict that is literally hundreds, many hundreds of miles away from its borders? Pakistan literally does not recognize Israel's right to exist, and yet it itself is a product of a quote-unquote two-state solution. It's one of the most hypocritical countries when it comes to foreign policy. It recognizes its right to exist, but it won't recognize Israel's. But all of that point, I guess, aside from now, I wouldn't be surprised if Pakistan were involved in this with the impure intention of trying to sabotage any deal, because at the end of the day, they don't recognize Israel. Many people in its country do support Israel's destruction, and its leadership sponsors and has sponsored, at least has sponsored historically, Islamist terrorism throughout the greater world. And it's no coincidence that anti-Israel rhetoric is now being deployed in a similar manner on state-funded media outlets around the world to condemn India using similar terminology. This is not an isolated movement. Oftentimes, criticism of Israel is being leveraged by the same people who criticize India for its historic presence in Kashmir. And so one has to be very suspect, especially when it comes to misinformation, potentially coming from Pakistan and its allies, whether that be Turkey and Qatar.
All right, sir, I request you to stay on with us as we're tracking further updates. We're now learning that Israelis have protested against the country's interception of the global Sumud Flotilla, which was carrying aid towards Gaza. The Israeli peace activists have gathered near the border area between Israel and Gaza, where soldiers dispersed them with force. Protesters have stated that they are in fact demonstrating against the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, and they're in support of the flotilla. Protesters have demanded aid to be let into Gaza and for the blockade to end. Israel has faced international condemnation, and we are seeing protests rage worldwide after the military had intercepted all 40 boats in the flotilla that was carrying aid to Gaza. More than 450 foreign activists, including Swedish climate campaigner Greta Thunberg, have been detained. Listen in to what some of the Israeli activists have said.
Came to protest against the genocide in Gaza and to support the global Sumud Flotilla that came and was arrested yesterday. I also came to support all the movement to impact sanctions on Israel to stop what's happening in Gaza right now, but also to stop what's happening in the West Bank, and to support the Palestinians and to help free Palestinians from ongoing ethnic cleansing.
We're here a group of activists unaffiliated with any organization. We are here first and foremost in solidarity with the people of Gaza to break the siege, whether it's from land right here or from the sea. The Flotilla, we saw how they were arrested, and we want to say we are in solidarity with all the people in the world that are doing anything they can to break this siege on Gaza, to end this genocide. We think that ethnic cleansing is wrong, and that's why we are here. We think that genocide is the #1 crime, and it needs to stop. It needed to stop a while ago. It needs to stop as quickly as possible, and we demand to let aid into Gaza. The blockade on Gaza is inhumane, and it's illegal, and it's wrong.
Meanwhile, viewers, shifting focus to the United Kingdom and the tragedy that has taken place in Manchester. British police have identified the man behind the deadly attack outside a synagogue in Manchester, which left 2 people dead and 3 critically injured in this horrific incident. The Greater Manchester Police has confirmed the identity of the attacker as Jihad Al-Shamie, a UK citizen of Syrian origin. He was shot dead by officers after he rammed a car into worshippers outside the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue in Crumpsall and then began stabbing people. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer visited the site of the attack. He visited the synagogue and condemned the terror attack which targeted Jewish people on the holy day of Yom Kippur. He also praised the police for their swift response in tackling the attacker. Listen in to what he had to say.
I wanted to come and see you to be able to say on my own behalf as Prime Minister, but on behalf of the whole country, thank you for your response yesterday. It's a very humble thank you. I've been to the scene to pay my respects and to get a sense of what you were confronted with. I've also seen the body-worn cameras and the footage out of that. And I am absolutely clear in my mind as to the professionalism of the response, the speed of the response, and also that an absolutely awful incident would have been even worse if it hadn't been for your response. Was of the highest order, and so I just wanted this was a dreadful attack, a terrorist attack, to inflict fear, attacking Jews because they are Jews. And it's really important today that the whole country comes together, people of all faiths and no faiths, to stand in support and solidarity with our Jewish.
Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Jordan Corpse. At the outset, I'd like to ask you, are we seeing a concerning pattern of places of worship, particularly synagogues, being targeted in recent years? We've seen similar instances in the United States, whether in Boulder in Colorado, Los Angeles or Washington, D.C. And if so, what is driving this pattern?
I think it's an inability from leadership to condemn anti-Semitism and to focus on anti-Semitism as a concerning trend that deserves to be given attention and focus just in its individual capacity. Anti-Semitism, even before the October 7th attacks, was skyrocketing around Western countries, and Western leadership did not do sufficiently enough to prevent the current rise that we are now seeing. Following the October 7th attacks, the October 7th attacks ultimately allowed and unleashed a new wave of anti-Semitism that was even far worse than what we had seen before. In the United States, the ADL was reporting that there was an increase of about 300%, I believe, if I recall properly, a 300% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the United States following those attacks, because the war gave political cover for people to go open season on Jews and Jewish institutions due to their historic religious and even ethnic ties to the land of Israel. And so, unfortunately, what we've seen in Europe has been a failure of leadership. And I say this in part as somebody with British roots, especially from leadership in the United Kingdom that has only inflamed misinformation and rhetoric towards Jewish institutions, or at least those perceived to be that thereof, such as the current state of Israel. Well, of course, it's okay for one to criticize Israel. When people spread misinformation about Israel, it unfortunately, and in the minds of anti-Semites, also imputes to Jews and creates further and further issues. And Labour's decision in recent days to misclassify the current situation ongoing in the Israel-Hamas war as a genocide, unfortunately, has only perpetuated further misinformation, animosity, and perhaps even inspired Jihad Al-Shamie's attack. We will learn later what his actual motive was, but it clearly was anti-Semitism.
Indeed, and in your assessment, what role does the public discourse, especially online, with regards to, we've seen an increased surge in anti-Semitism and, a lot of targeted attacks being made online against Jewish people practicing their faith. What role does all of this play in fueling, in escalating these kind of tensions?
Misinformation remains one of the biggest sources of modern-day anti-Semitism, and in fact, it's always been one of the biggest sources of misinformation when it comes to historic anti-Semitism as well. For centuries and millennia, Jews were accused of things that they did not do, and they were consequently attacked as a result of that, whether we talk about blood libels in Europe, whether we talk about libels of Jews in the Middle East and North Africa, especially over the last century. Nowadays, misinformation is perpetuated on a scale that we have never seen due to the rise of anti-Semitism and due to the rise of state actors and their proxies who act on their behalf that spread this misinformation. During the war, we've seen such gross misinformation from Al Jazeera, a Qatari-sponsored, state-sponsored Qatari media outlet that has effectively accused Israel of, at one point, killing 500 people in a hospital through a rocket attack. That was later proven to be false, and that rocket later was discovered to have actually come from the Islamic Jihad and killed approximately a dozen or so people. Later on during the war, Al Jazeera featured a story about Israeli soldiers supposedly raping people in a hospital in Gaza. That story was later proven to be false, and Al Jazeera did ultimately remove it, but not before the damage was done. And it was very clear that at the time that they had no intention of actually trying to remedy the damage that they had solved. Now we're seeing state-sponsored media outlets such as Al Jazeera even having terrorists on their payrolls. We have to question the news that we get from our media sources. We have to be critical. And we also have to understand that throughout the course of history, there have always been bad actors waiting for misinformation that they can perpetuate to scapegoat and blame the Jew for their societal failures that they failed to resolve on their own.
All right, so with that, I would like to thank you for taking our time, sharing your perspective on these key developments. Meanwhile, viewers, shifting focus to Indonesia, a total of 13 bodies have now been recovered in the tragic collapse that had taken place at an Islamic school in Indonesia. It's day 4 of the rescue mission, and the crucial 72-hour golden window has now already lapsed. Now, despite intensive efforts, dozens of students remain unaccounted for, with hopes for survivors fading. The Al-Khwarizmi Islamic Boarding School is a century-old institution. It collapsed while construction crews were adding to unauthorized floors, while students had gathered up for a prayer on the first floor. Rescue workers initially searched by hand but have since deployed heavy machinery in order to speed up recovery efforts. But however, there have been no signs of life. About 105 students have been injured, many with severe head injuries and broken bones, while 55 are still missing under the debris. Shifting focus to the United States of America, we're now learning that the U.S. Supreme Court has stated that it will consider overturning a Hawaii law that imposes strict regulations on where people can carry guns. The Trump administration has urged the justices to take the case, arguing that the law violates the court's 2022 ruling that found that people have a right to carry firearms in public under the Second Amendment. The Hawaii law bans guns on private property unless the owner has specifically allowed them. It also prohibits firearms in places like beaches, parks, bars, and restaurants that serve alcohol. State attorneys have argued that they have already loosened its concealed carry permit regulations to align with the High Court's 2022 ruling. They say its new restrictions strike a reasonable balance between gun rights and public safety as well. With us on the broadcast is Mr. David K. Johnson, American author, professor of criminal justice, law, journalism and political science at Rochester Institute of Technology, joining us from New York. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us. The U.S. Supreme Court is at the moment clearly conservative leaning. And in your assessment, what is the likelihood that the court will uphold the gun laws in Hawaii, given the context of its 2022 ruling as well? Is it likely to get overturned?
The U.S. Supreme Court is moving more and more toward the direction that any American anywhere can carry any kind of gun, including an assault rifle capable of firing multiple rounds very quickly. It's important to note that this was not the legal theory under our Constitution until a couple of decades ago, that it's all based on a comma, a grammatically incorrect comma in the Second Amendment, and that the Second Amendment doesn't say anything about guns. It talks about arms. These days, there are nuclear weapons that can be fit into a backpack. Of course, no one is going to allow individuals to have a nuclear weapon. So the real issue before the Supreme Court is there some limit that they will not overturn? For example, I cannot legally buy a howitzer, a military artillery piece, in my property. If somebody decides they want one, what would the Supreme Court do? And I have to tell you, I don't know. That's how radical they are.
Indeed. And so looking beyond the legal lacunae, what are the implications if this particular law is overturned for the people as such, for Americans on the ground? Because, you know, news is often rife with stories of shootouts taking place quite often in America and innocent people losing their lives in the streets quite often. School children as well. We've seen numerous shootings take place on campuses.
Well, one of the significant features of the Hawaiian state law has to do with bars. And I think it's reasonable to assume that in the future, if there is unlimited open carry of weapons and unlimited concealed carry of weapons, that sooner or later somebody who is drunk in a bar is going to shoot up people, and we're going to have more violent incidents like this. There's no other country in the world having these shootings with the frequency and commonality we do. They pop up once in a while in various places, but they're rare and unusual events. In America, they happen every week.
Indeed. And so, a final question on this particular news story. What potential policy shifts might occur, especially at the state level, if the U.S. Supreme Court rules to overturn the law? And could this lead to other states also revising their gun laws or adopting more lenient policies?
Where I live in New York, we have relatively strict gun laws. You've already seen them under assault in the courts. State legislatures are going to be forced to significantly weaken their gun laws. Never mind that in the Old West in America, in the iconic city of the Old West, Dodge City, in the 1800s, everyone had to give their guns over to the sheriff when they were in town. That's the historical precedent for this. But more guns, more gun violence, less controls. That is the clear direction the U.S. is heading, despite the fact that 90% of Americans in polls favor stricter regulation of firearms.
All right, so I request you to stay on with us as we're tracking further updates, this time from Madagascar. Madagascar's president, Andry Rajoelina, has accused foreign actors of backing ongoing protests to gain control over the country's lucrative mineral resources. In a national address posted on social media, Rajoelina claimed, without providing any evidence, that international organizations, aid agencies and foreign governments are funding the demonstrations. He has stated that their aim is to destabilize Madagascar and exploit its natural wealth. Take a look.
Misy firenena, misy agence nanankarana sy nanao an'izao hetsika izao. Ary ao anatin'izany dia ny zavatra tian'ny zareo atao dia mianky ny fahefana tsy amin'ny alalan'ny fividianana fa tonga dia ametraka fitondrana izay tsy katsaka retsiny fikandroana ny renan-kibon'ny tany eto an-independanttsika. Toy ny zavatra mitrany any amin'ny firenena hafa atsy Afrika ankehitriny.
The protests began on the 25th of September over widespread water shortages and power cuts, but have since expanded into a broader movement against poverty, corruption and government mismanagement. Now, earlier this week, Rajoelina disbanded his government in a bid to ease public anger. However, unrest flared again as demonstrators returned to the streets in the capital and other cities, prompting the police to use tear gas to disperse them. Now, despite mounting pressure to step down, Rajoelina has vowed to remain in office. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. David K. Johnson. Sir, interesting claims being made by the President of Madagascar. Are these accusations a tactic to discredit the protesters?
Well, I'm sorry, this is a subject I really don't know anything about, so I can't be useful to you on this. I'm sorry.
All right,